Here we are, chapter 21, to infinitives and beyond. Right, here we go. We're talking about infinitives in the Greek New Testament. And when we're saying infinitives, what are we talking about, right? We're talking about verbal nouns, right? A participle is a verbal adjective. An infinitive is a verbal noun. So it fills the noun slot of a sentence many times, but it is built on a verb stem. So, for example, I could say, I like ice cream. I like ice cream. Ice cream is a noun. But I could also put in that noun slot something else I like in the form of an infinitive. I like to eat. I like to run. I like to sleep, right? To eat, to run, to sleep are infinitives in English. When we think of infinitives in English, we think of to plus the verb, right? Greek does not form the infinitive in that same way. It has endings that you might expect. So, for example, this is one of the most common infinitives right here of luo, is Luane. I always think that sounds kind of like a Southern girl's name. Luane. Hey, does Luane live next to y'all? Right? So Luane means to loose, right? To loose. Also, loosai means to loose. That is the aorist infinitive. So the aorist infinitive is loosai. The present infinitive is luane. We might bring out the nuance of the present infinitive to say something like to be loosing, right? Because what we've learned about verbal aspect is still in play here, right? In the present form of the infinitive, the action is usually being presented in some progressive fashion, while the aorist looks at the action holistically. This can also be determined by the construction that the infinitive is in, by the meaning of the action of the verb that it's describing, and a number of other things like that. Let's look just at an example of the infinitive from the New Testament, and you can see already, look at these endings, ain, ain. Ain't you seen that before? You have. Remember the two most common infinitive endings, I think, I haven't statistically checked this out, but the two most common infinitive endings are ain, and then let's just say I, because sometimes it's something besides a sigma before it. So if you're going along and you think you have an infinitive and you see an ain or an I ending, and yes, we know other things can end in that too, then you probably have an infinitive. So in this example from Matthew 4:17, we see apatate. From then on, Jesus began. That is just the aorist middle form of archomai, to begin. You can see there's been an augment there. There's a sigma alpha. So Jesus began, and then just sit in that for a second. Jesus began. You're like, please finish that out for me, right? What did Jesus begin to do, right? We need what's called a complementary infinitive. We'll talk more about that later, but we need an infinitive that completes that idea. It's a very common use of the infinitive in Greek. Jesus began to preach and to say, and this is what he said, repent, you don't know that form yet, that's an imperative, for the kingdom of the heavens, or here it's smoothed out as kingdom, it's in the plural there, as it is up above, for the kingdom of the heavens has drawn near. Now, in the beginning of this chapter, in the textbook, we talk about how important it is to understand the nuances of the infinitive and the constructions that favor certain forms and so on. For example, if you don't know that, you could come to this and someone could make a big deal and say, these are present infinitives. So Jesus is progressively preaching, and someone could make a whole lot out of that I think would be a mistake. Why would that be a mistake? Because the verb archomai is followed by an infinitive in the New Testament 87 times, but plus an infinitive 87 times we find that construction. And of those 87 times, 87 out of 87 are present infinitives. So we see by the nature of that construction, it just stylistically demands a present infinitive. So the author essentially had no choice, and so we shouldn't make anything of that in terms of meaning, right? Okay, let's look at a little bit more about the infinitive here, right? Infinitive, as we said, is a verbal noun. All right, it's a verbal noun, and maybe you haven't thought about this, but why is it called an infinitive? Well, it can go with an infinite variety of subjects, can it? Like if other verbs are finite, they're limited, right? Lues, that is limited to a second-person singular subject. Sulues, the subject cannot be ego, the subject cannot be he mes. However, when we have an infinitive, we have one present active infinitive form, right? This is it. Luane, to loose. We don't have a masculine form, a feminine form, a neuter form. We don't have a first, second, third person form. That is the form. It goes with an infinite variety of possible subjects and constructions. It's not finite. It's not limited in the way that the indicative verbs and so on that you've learned so far are. So just think about that. Finite verbs, limited verbs, versus infinitives. Infinitives are verbal nouns built on verb stems. So what else about infinitives? Well, an infinitive has aspect, verbal aspect, right? That's the most prominent thing about the infinitive, whether it's perfective, which would be, of course, the aorist infinitive, imperfective, which would, of course, be the present, or stative, which would be the perfect. The vast majority of infinitives in the New Testament are aorist and present. I believe there are only 49 perfect infinitives in the entire New Testament, so we're not going to pay much attention to them. Infinitives also have voice, active, middle, or passive, right? You could say to loose, or you could to loose for oneself, or to be loosed, right? You can convey a passive idea, you can convey a middle idea, to loose for oneself, or you can convey an active idea, to loose. So active, middle, or passive. Infinitives come in all three varieties. Infinitives can take a direct object or be modified by an adverb. They're a verbal thing, so they can do those things that verbs do. They're also negated by may, like other non-indicative mood verbs, right? Indicative mood verbs are negated by oo, or if it's followed by a vowel with a smooth breathing mark, ook, or a vowel with a rough breathing mark, ook. So indicative verbs are usually negated with oo, ook, or ook. Non-indicative verbs, including non-indicative verbal forms, including the infinitive, are negated by may. However, because the infinitive is also a noun type thing, it's a verbal noun, it can take an article. And when it takes an article, the article is always neuter and it's always singular. So it's either going to be ta, to, to, or, that form ta is ambiguous. That could be the nominative or the accusative. But to make clear that it could take all four, could be nominative, genitive, dative, or accusative form of the neuter singular article. So you will just find, and there's debate sometimes about why that is. After prepositions, it makes clear what case-specific meaning of the preposition is intended. That's a very clear function. But there are other situations where the presence or absence of the article is the meaning of that is more debated. In fact, one of our professors here at Southern Seminary, Denny Burke, I grabbed this off Amazon, and it was blurry there too. Okay, so I'm sorry this is blurry, but his published dissertation was entitled Articular Infinitives. That means infinitives that have the article in front of them, right? Articular infinitives in the Greek of the New Testament on the exegetical benefit of grammatical precision. I always joke around in class. I say, students, if you decide to buy a copy of this, you can double Dr. Burke's sales for the last 6 months. Sometimes for fun, I just like to look and see how it's selling. And the sales rank on Amazon was 2,341,411. By the way, the larger the number it is, the less it is selling. So like bestseller would be 1. Grudem's Systematic Theology, I don't know, what is that? Maybe that's 1,100 or something like that all the time. So here, Dr. Burke's book on the infinitives, all in good fun, I'm kind of teasing here, is over 2 million. And sometimes I like to compare that, and occasionally it makes me feel better, and other times it makes me feel worse. I'll compare that with my published dissertation, Paul's Understanding of the Church's Mission. And I looked at it today at the same time I looked this up, and mine is slightly ahead. Remember, the lower the number is better. So mine is Paul's Understanding of the Church's Mission is 2,327,235. So I'm just a tad bit ahead of Dr. Burke there. Dr. Burke, by the way, I think he learned his lesson about book sales with this volume, because this was his second book. Okay, this was his second book right here, and it has sold quite a bit better. All right, just in case we're using this as homeschool curriculum, we're going to jump right back off that really quickly. All right, let's talk a little bit more about infinitives. They can have a variety of different case functions, right? So following prepositions like meta and dia, the preposition can communicate an idea followed by meta of after, or dia because. We'll see that in a moment. As we mentioned here, can occur after a preposition. Infinitives following prepositions are always articular. And this is a bit of a strange thing, but listen to this carefully. Infinitives take their subjects in the accusative case. Now, you are accustomed to verbs having their subjects in the nominative. But when it comes to the infinitive, they will have the subject in the accusative case. So, for example, if we're reading along and we have the verb luein, the subject of this, if it were present, would be me, right? The accusative, or auton, right? Or, humas. And you say, but isn't that the accusative? Yes. And you say, well, help me understand how that would be rendered. Well, we'll look at that in a moment in some examples. But if the subject of an infinitive is expressed, and you're trying to figure out how that's going to look, we'll see in a moment. The subject will be in the accusative case. What forms do you need to know? You need to know these forms. These forms of the present, these forms of the aorist. We did not put the perfect on here, but they're not that hard. La lucanai is the perfect active. La lusthai, La lusthai is the perfect middle passive. So if we give a translation of these, the perfect active would be to have loosed, and the perfect middle passive, we'll just give the passive translation, to have been loosed, right? To have been loosed. We're not really asking you to memorize those, but you'll notice the reduplication, you'll notice the kappa and the active. So there's some familiar things there. Again, across the entire New Testament, there are only 49 instances of the perfect infinitive. So we're not really going to pay a whole lot of attention to that right now. We're going to focus on the thousands of others, over 2,000 other examples of the present or the aorist. I had a student once recommend that you sing these to Mary Had a Little Lamb, right? Luein, luesthai, lusai, lusasthai, luthenai. And I can't sing very well, so we're going to have someone else sing that with a video clip, that if that's helpful for you in memorizing these. Notice how for the present active infinitive, luein, we give you the gloss to loose or to be loosing, because we're trying to remind ourselves there is a reason that the author would choose the present infinitive versus the aorist. These are not synonymous, right? There's one of them is inclined to look at the action as a whole, the other one in progression. However, certain constructions, as we already saw, for example, following the verb archomai, or certain verbs, by their very nature, they're open-ended, and so they prefer one over the other. So we don't want to overinterpret the choice of one infinitive over another, okay? So again, luein means to loose. Luesthai could be either the middle meaning, to loose for oneself, or to be loosed. Lusai is the aorist, to loose. Lusasthai, to loose for oneself. And luthenai, to be loosed. Notice our good friend the theta there, right? Like a big easy chair, kicking back, feeling passive. That's the aorist passive infinitive. So similar to the participle, similar to the indicative. The aorist has an active, middle, and passive form, while the present has an active form and then a shared middle passive. We've seen that pattern over and over again, both in the indicative and in the participle. In the end, you have to be able to recognize these. It's not too bad, right? To 5 forms, we're essentially asking you to memorize. You always know there are going to be some footnotes. Yes, so remember, if a Greek verb has an irregular aorist form, it's obviously going to build its aorist infinitive off that irregular stem, right? So in other words, if you have the verb, let's choose one that's real clear. If you have the verb erchomai, and I say, well, what's the aorist infinitive of that? The first thing you need to think is, what is the aorist indicative? Say, well, the aorist indicative of that is eilthon. Okay, so give me the stem, because infinitives don't have augments. Okay, I yank off that augment, so my stem, the aorist stem, is elth. And then we use present infinitive endings, right? You're like, that's weird. Yeah, but not too weird, because you've already seen aorist, second aorist participles use present participle endings. Now we see that second aorist infinitives use present infinitive endings. So the stem lets you know that it's second aorist, right? It's the ending there that communicates the idea of an infinitive, but we know it's not a present infinitive because it's building on a second aorist stem. So erchomai means I am coming. Elthane means to come or to go. To come or to go. And you can see in the book, I've just pasted this in from the book. There are other examples. Maybe I'll just choose one or two really clear ones. Let's see, for example, the verb harao or the verb blepo. The second aorist of that is adon. So again, infinitives do not have augments. We cut off our augments. So our second aorist stem is id. Second aorist stem plus present infinitive ending. So it's idane. Idane means to see, and it's an aorist infinitive. Let's look at one more maybe. Okay, so we have lambano. So what is the present infinitive? Kind of flipping it around here a little bit. What is the present infinitive of lambano? Well, the present infinitive of lambano is lambanane, right? We just stick on the present infinitive ending. That would be to receive, or perhaps to be receiving, right? To be receiving, to be taking. Well, what is the aorist infinitive of lambano? Well, then you have to say, well, what is the aorist indicative? Let me think. Oh, it's irregular. It's elaban. So aorist infinitives don't have augments, so I yank off the augment. That gives me the stem lab, right? That gives me the stem lab. But because it's an irregular aorist, a second aorist, it uses present infinitive endings. So the second aorist infinitive, the aorist infinitive of lambano, is labane, which means to receive, but does not mean to be receiving, right? This looks at the action as a whole, whereas the present infinitive usually has some progressive idea, but the truth is it will often be translated in a way that's basically interchangeable with the aorist. We can't really tell that we're translating a present infinitive many times when we translate it into English. Otherwise, it would be really cumbersome to always translate to be doing this or to be saying this or something like that. How are infinitives used? I'm glad you asked. One of the most common uses of the infinitive is the complementary infinitive. Now, I'm not a very good speller, but this is different from complementary with an I, right? Complementary with an I means, hey, that's a nice shirt you're wearing. Complementary with an E means completing, right? So, for example, a complementarian view of marriage and male and female roles would say that a husband and a wife have different roles, have different giftings, but they complement or complete each other. So the idea here is the infinitive completes another verb. The other verb is Adam, for whom it is not good for him to be alone, right? So the infinitive is like Eve, completing and bringing completion to that verbal construction. And there's certain verbs in the Greek that just need this. Verbs like began, wish, want, be able. So here's some examples here. The verb thelo means I want, I wish. So thelamen, we want, right? We want, you're like, please finish that out. We want. What do we want? We want to see Jesus, right? We want to see Jesus. Notice how the infinitive here takes its direct object in the accusative case. Footnote from earlier, it also takes its subject in the accusative case. So sometimes there's some ambiguity. Is this we want Jesus to see, or we want to see Jesus? Clearly it's we want to see Jesus from the context. But in another context, this could be rendered like it theoretically, we want Jesus to see, because the subject of the infinitive is in the accusative case. Another one, this is from archomai, to begin. So Jesus began, and if I were in class, it's hard to do this over a screencast. I would just let it hang there for a long time, and students would look uncomfortable. They're like, please finish that thought. Jesus began to preach. Notice how our little sort of rule here, looking for infinitives that end in ein or I. That works a lot of the time, doesn't it? We just say, oh, there's an infinitive. Oh, there's an infinitive. Okay, this is the verb to be able. So no one is able. You're like, help me out of there, please. No one is able to serve. There we go. No one is able to serve two masters or two lords. I sometimes, when I am doing these videos for the Daily Dose, I'll say, oh, this is a verb. Oh, I get this kind of bad Welsh accent. Oh, this is a verb that's just asking, just wanting, just wishing to be completed with a complementary infinitive, right? Wanting to be completed, wishing to be completed, asking to be completed. Where do I get that foolish little memory device? I get it right here from the My Fair Lady. Yeah, the classic movie, right? Let's see if this will play.
I'm willing to tell you. I'm wanting to tell you. I'm waiting to tell you.
All right, so maybe that will help you. I don't know. So again, the most common use of the infinitive in Greek is something we're familiar with because it's very similar to English, is the complementary use of the infinitive. Another use of the infinitive we'll find is the purpose infinitive. And an infinitive can be used to communicate an intended purpose. And when you run into this, you could find the infinitive by itself, or you can find the infinitive preceded by to. Remember, the possible articles in front of the infinitive are only neuter singulars, but the purpose infinitive is frequently preceded by the genitive to, or it can be preceded by eis ta. Notice the necessity to not translate this literally. You don't translate this into the, right? That eis ta is communicating, hey, this is purpose, possibly, right? We'll see some other possibilities too. Now, a lot of the times you can still just translate the infinitive as to plus the meaning of the verb. Sometimes you can't. So let's look at this together. So from John 14:2, paruomai, I am going hetoimasai, to prepare a place for you. So there's our infinitive, hetoimasai, from the lexical form hetoimazo, to prepare. We see the psi ending. It's an aorist infinitive. So probably just looking at this action as a whole, right? And then we're asking, how is it functioning? And really it's functioning, if we were to ask this this main verb, why? Jesus says, I'm going. We say, why are you going? The infinitive is functioning to communicate the idea of purpose. We could rephrase this. I am going in order to prepare a place for you. I'm going so to prepare a place. I am going, you just leave it to prepare a place for you, right? So this is more of a question of labeling function than it is often translation, because the infinitive can be just often translated, many times translated, just to plus the meaning of the verb. But within context, it's expressing purpose. Infinitives can also express result, right? As a result infinitive is one that expresses an actual result and not merely an intended one. And of course, when you're dealing with divine activity, those overlap 100%, right? What God purposes happens, results. And so there's sometimes debate in some infinitives of the New Testament. Should we label this purpose? Should we label it result? Does it really matter? So this usage typically occurs after hosta, right? A result infinitive frequently occurs after hosta. Hosta means so that. And less commonly after eis ta, because eis ta usually communicates purpose. Again, you can see there's some ambiguity, right? Does eis ta always introduce a purpose infinitive? No. Usually, yes, but it can also introduce a result infinitive. So, an example here, epistusin, he believed, and then you have eis ta genesthai auton patera, palon ethno. So, you have he believed, and then you see this eis ta, and you see an infinitive, genesthai. That is from the verb genomai. Right, from the verb genomai, it's building on the second aorist stem. Remember, the second aorist of genomai is a genomain. What does that give us? That gives us the second aorist stem gen. Second aorist stem plus present infinitive ending, here the present middle ending, genesthai, to be, to become, right? So let's just do it super literal. He believed, and I'm going to imagine we didn't review some of this stuff earlier, so let's go astray here. he believed into thee to become him father of many nations. You're like, man, this is so literal. I can't figure out what it means. That's right. That's why we have to apply some of what we learned. Ace ta communicates purpose or result, right? Ace. So we can just say so that, right? Because that's how we communicate purpose or result in English. He believed so that, and remember what case is the subject of the infinitive found in? It's found in the accusative. That's why auton is in the accusative. That's functioning as the subject of that infinitive idea. So that he, and there's the idea became, and some of you are going to be mad. You're like, why didn't you translate that to become? Because that's an infinitive. Well, because we don't use infinitives exactly like this in English. And so if we translate it as an infinitive, it's terrible English. It doesn't make any sense. This is an infinitive used to communicate purpose. So we need to use a construction in English that communicates purpose and allows us to have a subject for that purpose and so on. So that he believes, so that he became a father, or the father of many nations. Okay, kind of tricky, right? I tell students it's almost like you have to put the sentence, like here's a little meat grinder and you feed the words in, and the accusative subject comes out as your subject in English, and the infinitive comes out as your verb, and then you have to ask, how do I introduce this in English with so that he became, right? You have to put it through the meat grinder, so to speak, and have it come out as an understandable normal English construction. Another use of the infinitive is the infinitive following certain prepositions. So we have metata plus the infinitive to communicate previous or antecedent time. So we would translate this after, right? After ... We have into plus the infinitive to communicate contemporaneous time. So we translate that while. Pratu or pren a before the infinitive to communicate subsequent time. So we translate this before. So I just want to be real clear here. What this practically means is that when you see that metata and there's an infinitive, you just say, oh, this is going to be an after clause. Into plus the infinitive, oh, this is going to be a while clause. Pratu or pren before the infinitive, oh, this is going to be a before clause. Or diata followed by the infinitive, this is going to be a because clause. These are a little bit different. These are like putting the infinitive construction through the meat grinder. You cannot do it literally. You have to render it in English as an understandable because, before, while, or after clause. After blah, 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 comma. While, blah, 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 comma. Before, blah, 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 comma. Let's see an example of this, okay? So this is how it works. Metata egerthenai me praoxo humas eistain Galilean. Well, let's start with what's easy for you. Into Galilee. You're like, I got that. Praoxo is from the verb praago, right? Ago is to go or lead or bring. Praago is to go before. And you can see a sigma there, so that's just a future active indicative, first singular. I will go before you all into Galilee, right? So we're going to sort of set that aside. We say that's the stuff that maybe I didn't know a lexical form, but I can follow that. Nothing really new there. Future form, I will go before you, right? The accusative direct object, into Galilee. I will go before you all into Galilee. Then what is this stuff at the beginning? Metata egerthenai me. Well, after you've studied the forms in this chapter, right, that thenai, let's just go back here and pull up the chart here. See if we can find it. There it is, right? So look at this ending, thenai, right there, luthenai, to be loose. That's just a aorist passive infinitive, and that will make sense soon. So egerthenai, that's my infinitive. To be raised from egero. And then this me is, you say, well, that's just, ego, mu, moi, me, that's just the accusative singular, me, me. And this is, let's see, meta followed by the accusative. That means after. So after. Okay, so let's go real literal here. After the to be raised me, I will go before you into Galilee. We are not going to hire you for our Bible translation committee if you render it that way. After the to be raised me, I will go before you into Galilee. It almost sounds, it doesn't sound good. So what do we do here? This is where we come to this construction. Let me clean it off a little bit. How should your mind think when you encounter this? It'd be great if you could just think in Greek, right? But let's be realistic and say, okay, I come to that and I'm like, oh, yeah, this is going to be one of those after clauses. I'm so glad Dr. Plummer went over this, meta ta plus the infinitive. It's going to be an after clause. So I'm ready for this. So I come down here and say this is going to be after. And then I remember that the subject of the infinitive is going to be in the accusative case. But in English, we would put that in the subject case. I, right? I. And then this is just going to be rendered as a normal verb. It's not going to be rendered as an infinitive usually because it wouldn't make any sense. So after I, it's a passive idea referring to the future. After I am raised, perhaps after I will be raised, something like that. After I am raised, right, it's referring to something that's going to happen. Remember, infinitives don't have any inherent time. They're just a verbal noun. So the time frame of what's being talked about is communicated by the context. Here it's referring to something that hasn't happened yet. Jesus is referring to a future event. After I am raised, after I will be raised, I will go before you into Galilee. So that's how those are going to work. And there are more examples of them in the textbook that you can look at translated. And maybe I just think it's helpful to just go at it piece by piece. Here's my little introductory preposition, so I know it's going to be this kind of clause. I look for a subject in the accusative case. That's going to be my subject. I put the Greek verb through the meat grinder and render it as an understandable English verb with this subject, and I put a comma. Okay, let's remind ourselves. We're only asking you to learn 5 forms in the chapter. That's the good news, and we even have a little Mary Had a Little Lamb song for that, right? Luain, luesthai, lusai, lusasthai, luthenai. But then, yes, there are some little tweaks with the way it's going to be used. With the prepositions, with purpose, it's stretching our brains a little bit in terms of usage and function.